And we're live.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our No Teen Shame live teach-in. We are so happy that you're able to join us, and we want to let you know that during the course of our conversation, feel free to use the question and answer function within Google Hangout and/or submit questions on Twitter with using the hashtag #NoTeenShame. So welcome, everyone. We're a couple of minutes late getting started. We'll blame it on Mercury, technology, and all of those things. But it also is the awesomeness of being able to bring people together from across the country. And from time to time, technology has its benefits and challenges. So welcome. For those of you who are unfamiliar with No Teen Shame, I just want to let you know it is a movement illuminating the need for shame-free, LGBTQ inclusive, comprehensive sexual health education, and equitable access to resources and support for young families. This is a movement that started in 2013 by 7 teenage mothers from around the country who had been doing advocacy work in their own right, sort of working on behalf of and working for pregnant and parenting young people for years, but felt disenfranchised and frustrated with the way in which our families' experiences were presented. This was a movement born out of frustration, but it has emerged into being a leader in reframing the messages about young families across our country. We launched our first campaign, No Stigma, No Shame, and the set of educational and informative images went viral. No Teen Shame's images have since been used in presentations, classrooms, and workshops around the country. 3 years later, we are an award-winning campaign with media credits that include Rewire News, Miss Magazine, and She Knows, to name a few.
There are many differences between No Teen Shame and conventional teenage pregnancy prevention frameworks. But for the sake of the time, we will share some of what we think are most compelling. First, No Teen Shame was created by and is fully run by teenage mothers of a variety of intergenerational and cultural and racial identities. This diversity, combined with the geographical diversity of each co-founder's place of residence, allows us to come into this work as our full selves and with a different point of view. In addition, No Teen Shame is a completely volunteer-run campaign. This work has been a labor of love and dedication. What No Teen Shame has been able to accomplish in 3 years, many programs and campaigns are unable to achieve. We know that this is because those who are most affected by marginalization are most knowledgeable and best prepared to speak up and out for themselves and their peers. No Teen Shame does not believe that shame and stigma have ever accomplished anything positive or good. We believe that young people are capable of making the best decisions for themselves when presented with accurate, inclusive, and shame and stigma-free information. We also know that there are underlying political realities in place that are being blamed on the bodies of young women, and primarily young women of color who decide to carry a pregnancy to term and parent.
I think it's really important that we start at a place where we talk about the underlying political structures that exist way before any of us became pregnant and decided to parent in our teenage years. Speaking from a personal experience, I lived in poverty before I became pregnant, and oftentimes prevention campaigns will say that teenage pregnancy leads to poverty, when in fact multiple studies show that poverty is one of the leading indicators of a young person experiencing an unintended pregnancy in their teenage years. Furthermore, the lack of education in general for people of lower social economic class greatly contributes to all sorts of things in someone's life, not just limited to sex ed. And while sexual health education is a large part of what young people need, it's not the only thing that young people need. Young people need to feel empowered and informed and positive about their lives. Oftentimes it's not possible for young people who are living in deep poverty, who are experiencing different and changing family dynamics, or transitional housing situations, or have families of mixed immigration statuses. What happened with what seems to have happened with the teenage pregnancy prevention campaigns and frameworks is that young people are saddled with the political realities that they live in. And this is just completely inaccurate and disingenuous, and it's harmful. If we tell young people who are already living in situations that may not be ideal for themselves and their families, that once they become pregnant, things will only get worse, this is not healthy for anyone. It also makes it seem as if young women of color who decide to parent their children are sole takers of welfare, when in fact, for many young women who have experienced an unintended pregnancy in their teens and choose to parent, they often say that their child was a motivator for wanting to do better for themselves.
Yeah, and contrary to popular messaging around teen pregnancy, and much like many of my peers, the birth of my child at the age of 17 really prompted me to think a little more deeply about the impact that I wanted to make in the world today, and for the generations of women ahead of us. And so, like many young mothers, her presence, my daughter's presence in my life became a daily reminder that progress is incremental, and that holding myself to someone else's standards of what motherhood is supposed to look like isn't helpful. And her role in my life and our relationship really helped me see that we're not just trying to survive the day, but we're really trying to change and cultivate what our future can and should look like. She motivated me to stay in school, to go to college, to be vocal, to take risks, and even move across the country on our own so that I could pursue a new career. But the things that people told me when I was pregnant about what my future would look like were so far from the truth of what it really looks like now. And that reality isn't uncommon for a lot of teen parents. But at the same time, the way that I felt about young motherhood and my daughter's role in my life isn't uncommon amongst young parents either. So teen pregnancy is often tied to high dropout rates in the United States. We've kind of tied negative statistics and data that tries to reinforce this idea that we are not educated and we're not motivated to pursue education or careers. But in a recent report by the Gates Foundation, it was reported that a third of young women in school actually who cited teen pregnancy and young parenthood as a major factor for dropping out also reported that they were doing well in school, that they felt motivated to stay in school, and they believed that they would have graduated on time if they had a system of support in school. So it's important to acknowledge that the students who are often pushed out of schools are motivated to stay, but they feel like they have no other option. And we have to acknowledge that the reality is for young moms is that we want a better life for our children, and they are our main source of motivation and drive. And there's literal data to back it up. And so now, as we are young moms, we are building foundations with our daughters and our children who are our motivators. And we get to educate them, to elevate their voices, and provide them with opportunities to feel empowered. And a reminder that for so many of us, the birth of our children were defining moments where we were able to re-examine and redefine our lives and futures. And that motivation helped us unpack the ways in which we've been labeled and stereotyped. But even with the motivation, we know that, as have been mentioned, there are policies and systems in place that make it significantly harder for us and our families to thrive. And one of the many policies that negatively impacted young and single parents is Bill Clinton's Welfare Reform Act of 1996.
Speaking of Bill Clinton's Welfare Reform Act that kicked in 1996, and when I think about my own narrative in the context of policies and the way policies impacted my life personally, but even more importantly, I think about the commitment of our work to reframe the messages that also shape policy. So when you got to kind of go back even a little bit further before 1996 to think about some of the messages that were coming out during the Reagan administration about welfare queens. And this notion that there were all these women out milking the system, taking the system for what it's worth, driving Cadillacs, living in the projects with multiple cars and all kinds of things. That was not the reality of most people that I knew who also was depending on the system in order to provide for their family. So if we go back to the myth of the welfare queen and the way in which those messages then set the stage for Bill Clinton's 1996 welfare reform And you overlay that to 1996 was also the year that my second son was born. I was 19. I just finished my first year in undergrad at a private college in Boston. And even with all of my motivation from having my first son when I was 15, I finished high school. I did the thing, I had stayed on the track and the path that I had intended to be on in terms of both my education, my career path, and my wanting to build the family and the reality that I thought my son deserved. I found myself pregnant in 1996. I also found myself with a part-time job, going to school full-time, and towards the end of my pregnancy, really needing some additional supports, and I applied for welfare at that time. During my time of applying in 1995, transitioning into 1996 when my son was born, it also was the kick-in of the federal legislation, but I also want to place this in a Massachusetts context in which we had the TANF bill that had already gone forward and a number of policies that at the local level were being misinterpreted at best and really harmful to families trying to strive both economically but meet the needs of their families and find an opportunity out of poverty. So in my sophomore year in college, I found myself pregnant, on welfare. My 3-year-old son was in daycare, and because I was going to a 4-year college and not a welfare to work program, I was ineligible for daycare anymore. So my son, who had been in school up until that point, and it really was the opportunity to have affordable daycare that allowed me to finish high school and allowed me to start college, was no longer available to me. And I still attempted to persevere. But being 8 months pregnant, going to college every day with a full course load with a 3-year-old who also had severe asthma really made it difficult for me to continue my college education. But even more importantly, it made it really difficult to get up every day, to have to go back and forth to the welfare office because the caseworker didn't understand an interpretation of a policy or the practice of that policy in the lives of people, never mind young families. And I was doing this at 19 years old. My sons are 24 and 20 years old now, and I can't imagine what it took for me. You know, I look back and it's like, oh yeah, I did that. But the truth of the burden that put on me and the level of real depression and despair that I lived through while I went to welfare offices asking for help to really just give me an opportunity to access education and have daycare so I can continue on the path I was on to build the family my family deserved. What got in the way was actually policies, not my motivation, not the fact that I had my kids when I was 15 and 19 years old. What got in my way was real access to being able to have what I need. And those are the true stories of the 1996 welfare reform.
So we know that research indicates that teen pregnancy, that pregnant and parenting teens experience reductions in educational attainment. We like to really highlight that, and campaigns tend to focus on how an early pregnancy is a barrier for young women to finish their education. What's interesting, though, is when you look at the research, you can also find studies that support the fact that over and over again, teen parents report increased motivation and more focus in school once they have their child, but that this newfound commitment is not always met with support both in home and school. So I think that we need to look at the disconnect of what's happening with young parents who now have this newfound motivation to finish school but aren't able to finish because of lack of support, because of misinterpretation of policy by educators. So in my case, when I had my son at age 17, I was doing really poorly in school. I was not on track to graduation. There were many credits that I needed to make up, and I didn't have an interest to do it. Once I found out that I was pregnant with him, it's as if my entire focus shifted, and I realized that I needed to get it together both for myself and for him. And so I signed up for a summer school course, and during that course, I was hospitalized for severe morning sickness. And the administrator and the teacher of this 6-week course told me that I needed to leave school because I had missed a week of school. Unbeknownst to myself and also my mother, who was an educator in a district nearby, my Title IX rights were being violated at that point because I shouldn't have been kicked out of school. I should have had accommodations to remain in school because it was a pregnancy-related illness. So that brings me to Title IX and the fact that many people working within the schools aren't aware that Title IX covers the protections of pregnant and parenting teens. So I work in the 10th largest district in the state of California. And I work with many educators up and down the state, and I've found that it's not always an intentional push-out that happens. A lot of times educators don't realize that pregnant and parenting teens have protections under Title IX. I think people hear Title IX and you think of protections for sports and also for sexual harassment, but there's a third component of the federal law that covers pregnant and parenting teens and their right to participate in school activities and extracurricular activities, their right to excused absences and in the event of pregnancy-related illness or after they give birth to their child. And it also protects them against harassment. So in my case, I was pushed out of school and then also experienced the fact that my teacher then told the entire class the reason why I was kicked out of school, even though I was only 8 weeks pregnant and nobody knew at that time that I was pregnant or whether or not I was going to choose to continue with the pregnancy. So my rights were violated on many levels. This was in 1998. I can say that this is still happening today, both in the district that I work in and districts across the nation. So it's interesting as an educator in the system to see the impact that stigma and shame have both on the way that educators treat and address pregnant and parenting teens within the district, and also how it affects the children of the pregnant and parenting teens. We have Mary Louise.
It looks like technology may have gotten in the way. Are we there, Mary?
I'm here. Can you hear me? Sorry. Okay. So as a young mother myself and a mother who has experienced stigma and shame on my own, I've also experienced indirectly seeing my own children and the effects of stigma and shame that I have felt, how it's impacted them. Throughout my pregnancy, I was very alone. I felt very ashamed and embarrassed, and I felt as if everybody thought I was going to do or be was ruined. And so because of that, I did not access medical care. I never got any prenatal care when I was pregnant with my first son. And I didn't tell anybody that I was pregnant until I went into labor. So the shame and stigma that I felt was internalized, but was perpetuated by what I knew was being said about teen mothers and teen pregnancies in society and in my school. You know, that's not something that I can ever change, but part of the work that I do now is purposefully, so no young mother or father ever feels like they have to hide their pregnancy, like they can't tell anybody, and hopefully that the young parents I work with know that they can come to me, if not anybody, and tell me that and share that with me so they don't have to carry that alone. Having a young child and being parented, still living in my own parents' house after I had him, was significant as far as the impact on accessing health care for my child and his education. Some examples that I have experienced, but I know other mothers have experienced as well, is how a pediatrician would look at my mother if she accompanied me when talking about my son versus me. I've had prescriptions written out to a parent versus me as my child's parent. And accessing education is really impacting. Going to school with my son, preschool, kindergarten, first grade and on. This year he's going to be a senior, but still the impacts of parenting young and as a teenager follow. Single parenting, coming in oftentimes as a single woman, I don't feel as respected, and I know that's something that is echoed with other young parents, both through No Teen Shame and that we've met over the years in the work that we've done. You know, unintentionally, this hinders access to education and health care for young children. If a young mother does not feel respected and safe in her doctor's office or her pediatrician's office for her child, there's a chance that she won't take her child there when they need to go. Not intentionally and not to hurt them, but because she feels unsafe and she feels stigmatized and shamed. So it's really important that we recognize that that shame and that stigma does both indirectly and directly affect their children. I think another a benefit to our children seeing us advocate for them and for ourselves and struggling through it, because oftentimes it is a struggle, and part of what we do is to share some of the experiences we've had to prevent other young parents from having to experience that, and to work with organizations to say, look, your intentions might be really awesome, but we want to make them better, and we want to make sure that we're really inclusive and we aren't unintentionally hurting anybody or intentionally. Our children have the benefit of seeing us learn to advocate and navigate these systems. And so they become self-advocates for their health care, for their education, for their sexuality, for things that maybe a lot of kids who might not have had the experience and the joys of being raised by a teen parent have not had to have at an early age. So they get to learn those skills at an earlier age and learn to help identify and define themselves at an earlier age. And I think that's very impacting and something that we need to recognize as a celebration.
You're absolutely right. And I love how you really talk about the ways in which stigma and shame affected your access to healthcare, as well as the access of to healthcare for our children, because it's something that's very, very real. I know one question we often get, and anyone can jump in and answer if they'd like, is, well, you were a teen parent, so what will you say to your children?
So, go ahead, Consuela.
Okay, sorry. I what have I said to my children? So I have two sons. My oldest son, Devontae, just turned 24 in March, and my youngest son, Tamari, it will be 20 actually on Sunday. And so I remember when each of them turned 16, which is a critical year for me because when I was 16, I was a mother. And so it was something about seeing them go through adolescence at a part of adolescence that I was actually unfamiliar. I didn't know what it meant to be 16 and not also be in school, parenting, and really juggling motherhood and the battles of motherhood between my mother and I. She lovingly supported me, but at times it was difficult for me to do. Because not only did other people expect for her to be my kid's mother, at times she took on some authoritarian roles around decision making that made that difficult for me. So that was my 16-year-old experience. And so when my sons hit 16, I remember those birthdays being interestingly challenging for me. And in the years since, I would say some of the challenges is there are times that I am expecting them to be exceptional young people, right? Making good decisions all the time. And partly because I was forced by my responsibilities to make choices that were hard. I was doing homework, cleaning the house, and going to work. So to argue with them about taking the trash out, I'm like, what is wrong with you? Of course, you need to just take the trash out, because I know that they're capable of doing so much more. And I remember one of my sons saying to me, I'm not you. I don't have to do all of the things that you had to do when you were a teenager. And making room for them to be the teenagers that they needed to be, so I could see them and not see me in them, was a challenge for me, actually. And the things that I said to them about the decisions about love and family and sex really were shaped both by my personal experience, but also my professional experience as a qualified sexual health educator. So I talked to my children all along the way about the kinds of relationships that were good for them and the ways in which that I hope when they find themselves deciding to make decisions around sexual behavior, that they were deciding that based on what was good for them and not based on what someone else told them they should or should not do. And I talked to them about the things that they needed so that they were making good decisions, but even more importantly, I had the conversations with them about what I hoped for them. Not just about what I hoped for them on how they use their genitals, but what I hoped for them about being a good person in the world, being good to a partner, whomever their partner may be, and really being a good person in the world where they can see the way I wanted to see them. I'm hoping that when they go through the world, they're seeing people for who they are and not who someone tells them they should be.
Thank you, Consuela. And I think you really touched on something where the question itself kind of makes it just like reduces our experiences to our genitalia, right? Like,
Did we lose Gloria? Well, I'm going to answer the question while we get Gloria back on the line, because I know, and I think this is kind of the conversation Gloria was going towards, but we're asked this question very often, right? Like, how are you going to prevent your kids from becoming like you? Which I think is the real question that they're asking, and that's a really tough thing to ask someone, because you are insinuating that who we are and like what our identities are is not something that someone should aspire to be. And that's because we're reduced to one stereotype, right? But when we look at who we are and our full identities and the things that we've been able to do and overcome, we are very strong and powerful women. We have learned how to really use our voice to make effective change that benefit our children and future generations. And we are pushing back against things that are harmful for our families and communities. And so, I mean, if the question here is, you know, how are you going to prevent your daughter from becoming like you? I'd say I'm not. I want her to be exactly like me and better. And so the conversations that I have with her about choices is different, right? And so we talk about consent and we talk about healthy relationships and we talk about options and making informed choices. And so I think instead of asking us, you know, that very narrow question, maybe ask something that's different, right? So what are the qualities that you want to pass down to your daughter? Or what are the things that you learned that you want your kids to learn from you? And we have a lot of that. We have a lot of things that we have experienced that we hope our children don't have to. And so I think the difference is that for us, we're very open about our lives and our realities and the things that we face and how we were limited and what choices we could make. And so those are the conversations that we're having with our kids. And frankly, you know, a lot of us have said this, but if one of our kids, you know, during their teen years became a parent, that for us, like, that's not our biggest fear. You know, there are so many more scary things that are happening to our kids out there that we're genuinely afraid of. And so preventing a teen pregnancy isn't necessarily at the top of our list. What's at the top of my list is ensuring that my daughter has the information to make informed consensual choices, and that she has self-esteem, and that she sees her body for what it really is and isn't falling into this category of like feeling like she is a public health issue and that she needs to avoid making the same mistakes her mother did. And so that kind of also leads us to another question, which I'm sure either Christina or Consuela, you guys can probably answer, but we're often also asked, you know, since you're advocating for teen parents, does that mean you're promoting teen pregnancy to the community? And so how would you guys answer that question?
I think what we're promoting is the right for young people to have access to health education, to have like a comprehensive sex education, and access to that. I mean, it's not happening in our schools. A lot of parents aren't talking with their children about it at home, but youth are curious and they want answers and they need places to go where they're going to get safe and accurate information. Like Natasha said, with my own son, that was never at the forefront of my mind, worrying about whether or not we were going to have a teen pregnancy. And he is in college now. We've had many open discussions about sexuality and choices. But again, working in inner city schools, you see what teens are up against. I see children losing their lives to violence in the street. I see children becoming addicted to prescription drugs and illegal drugs. And so I think that when I think about those issues as opposed to preventing teen pregnancy, my focus isn't really on a prevention so much, unless that's what the teen wants. You know, if they're wanting access to birth control, that they're needing support. But really, my focus is just how can we raise healthy communities? How can we help to support our children in making decisions and getting the information that they need? So I think that's really where my energy is focused, and I think that it's pretty much in line with what No Teen Shame is.
And similarly, I remember actually, Natasha, you and I having these conversations during our days of working together in an organization that supported both expanding adolescent sexual health information across our state, as well as the leading organization of supporting expecting and parenting young people. And I remember some of the conversations of like, well, how can a place do both, right? And you're talking about an organization at times when those questions would be posed to me by people working in communities, school administrators, a number of other leaders and decision makers in local communities. And when they'd ask me that question, I would internally be saying, you're asking that of me too, right? I actually do still support that my sons and all young people have and deserve